I never really believed in the paranormal or supernatural. I always thought the stories about people being haunted or possessed were just stories made up for entertainment, or cases of severely mentally ill patients being misunderstood by fanatical priests claiming demonic possession. I never suspected that they were actually real. But when I was 13, my naive brain would be put in its place. It was the summer of 2007. Life was good. I had a pretty normal teenage life. I had a few friends my age who lived in the same neighborhood as me, and we would do a lot of outdoor activities like hiking, mountain biking, and fishing. We lived just north of the Ozark Mountains in a nice little town in Arkansas. My father had worked very hard to give us all a good life. He came from a poor family and joined the military at 18 to better his future, and it paid off. He got a good job working on airplanes, and we moved to the country. My parents got a steal on a really nice old house in the village. It was a really nice little community built into the woods, which had golf courses, private lakes and trails, and its own shopping center with a couple of restaurants. We were a happy, normal middle-class family. That is, until that thing showed up and ruined our lives. There were a lot of local legends about the natives that used to inhabit the area. Supposedly, our entire community was built on top of sacred land. I used to walk the trails near my house a lot, and you could find cliffs and overhangs with Indian paintings on the walls and remnants of their civilization. The kids at school would often scare each other by telling tales of shamans summoning skinwalkers, and that to this day, they still haunt the woods at night, looking for a midnight snack. I always laughed it off. Ghosts and monsters aren't real. They're just made up stories to scare kids. I always thought the ghost hunter shows were ridiculous. You wouldn't hear or see anything on camera, but the people in the show would jump at creaks in the night, and suspenseful music would play while the camera focused on empty darkness. Those shows can be fun for the imagination, but the reality of paranormal entities is much more terrifying. They can tear apart families and bring your whole world crashing down. I would learn this dark reality one summer night. The air was cold, my window open, and could hear the wind flowing through the leaves. The cicadas, reverberating through the midnight woods, put me in a sleepy trance. I relaxed and drifted off to sleep. In such a peaceful place, I was completely safe. I always felt one with the woods. It really is beautiful here. Cradled in the sounds of nature, I drifted deep into sleep. Then a wave of panic. I feel every hair stand up. Chills down my spine. I feel the eyes of someone on me. I can feel their sinister intent. Every fiber in me is telling me to run. There's something here that wants to kill me. No, worse. It wants to own me, to see me suffer. Has been watching me for a long time. I've been chosen. I can't breathe. Help me. Help me. I scream, Mom. I hear laughter, not human, not a physical voice. Multiple voices of all octaves laughing at once. I can't open my eyes. I can't breathe or talk, but I can see its eyes. Blue, bloodshot, bulging eyes. Huge pupils. Red is filling my mind. I feel pressure. My entire body is vibrating, and I feel like I'm going to explode. I gasp as I fully awaken, but as I open my eyes, I freeze. I can't believe what I'm seeing. Through my open door, I can see something laying on our living room couch. It's clearly visible, but clearly not a person. It's like a shadow, but flowing. The moonlight illuminates its face, a skull with a sinister smile. It has those same eyes from my dream. Huge, bulging, wide, open eyes. Crystal blue pupils. It's staring at me, smiling. It's awkwardly sprawled out on the couch, and its shadowy body, like a translucent but pitch black cloak, flows as if underwater. I'm getting chills just remembering this, and I want to be clear. This is not a fictional story. This really happened. I was so scared I was frozen. I felt electricity going up and down my spine, through my brain. My eyes were wide and watering. My mouth hung open. It stared into my eyes, into my mind for what felt like hours. It then quickly shifted out of sight. It darted down the couch and into the shadows. Adrenaline hit me. I ran into my parents' room. I burst open the door, panting and covered in sweat. My parents were at first annoyed. and it was a typical thing parents do when something like this happens. But as I described every detail of my encounter, and when they saw how terrified I was, I started to see a look of unease and fear in my father's eyes. He was scared. He believed me. My father, being a devout Christian, believed in demons, and he was convinced I had just been tormented and that I was in danger. He was very serious, and I could see that he was disturbed by what had just happened. He woke up my little sister, and the whole family had gathered in the living room. I wish my dad had never done what he did next. He got out his Bible and turned the pages to a verse. I don't quite remember the actual verse, but it was something about casting out the demons. "In the name of Jesus Christ, I command you to leave my family alone," he yelled angrily, cursing the demon. "If you want one of us, take me. Leave my family alone." We sat in the living room, talking well into the night, and after a while, we were all tired and went back to bed. I couldn't sleep though. I couldn't forget those eyes, its evil smile, the way it moved. It was disturbing. Fast forward a few months and things were normal. Me and my sister went back to school, and for the most part, I had forgotten all about the demon. I had even convinced myself it was a bad dream, or even sleep paralysis, even though that was the only time sleep paralysis had ever happened to me. I went on with life until we got the worst news I had ever heard to this day. My dad was diagnosed with a rare form of bone cancer, and it had spread. He was dying. We were devastated. I hugged my father and cried all day that day. I couldn't believe I was going to lose my dad. He was always so strong and seemed very healthy. The weird thing is, the doctors were also puzzled. His cancer was usually found in teenagers. It was a cancer that almost 100% of the time was only found in boys and in their early teens. This shocked me and made me feel guilty. The whole experience of the demon became prominent in my mind, and I remember my father's words to the demon. I think it had its eye on me, but went for my dad instead. I wish it had taken me though. My family would be better off today if it had. My father remained positive through his sickness. He went to chemotherapy sessions, started eating healthier, and worked out as much as he could. With his bald head and amputated leg, people would often come up to him and thank him for his service. He always laughed and said thank you because he was a vet. However, contrary to what people thought, his condition was much worse than if he had stepped on an IED. He lived for 3 more years, even though the doctors said he had less than a year to live. He always stayed happy and positive, more for our sake than his own. But towards the end, he started to slowly deteriorate. It was awful. I couldn't do anything to help him. The man I looked up to, who protected us, who I always saw as invincible, was crumbling before me. He lost all his weight and started sleeping on the couch to not disturb my mom. He was so sick. He suffered so much. I would hear his death rattles and moans and want nothing more than to help him in any way I could. Something that disturbs me so much to this day is that I started to realize something. He more and more resembled the demon. He was getting so thin, he looked like a skeleton, and he had very blue eyes. Sometimes he would just look at me from the couch and I would get chills. The demon had been mocking me, imitating what he would do to my father while viciously smiling, as if it was funny. This enrages me. How can something be so vile, so purely evil? My father soon died and left us a broken family. My mother fell into a deep depression. I looked after my little sister, tried to be the best father figure I could, even though I was a poor substitute. We fell behind on the bills and the bank foreclosed our house. We lost everything. The next handful of years were a struggle, but now I'm an adult and I've gotten some sort of stable life. I recently figured out why my father was so shaken that night and didn't just blow it off as a bad dream. I visited my sister recently and we started talking about ghosts and the paranormal. I asked if she had seen anything like that, and she hesitated for a second, but then told me, and what she said gave me the chills. She was very young the night I saw the demon, and had largely forgotten that night, but she told me she used to see a shadowy man standing at the end of her bed. He had a skull for a face. My father knew this and realized it wasn't a coincidence or a child's imagination at that point. Demons are real.
I'm an eternal skeptic. I believe in things such as God, angels, demons, etc. But when it comes to ghosts and such, I tend to be on the fence. I am a spiritual person and can feel good and evil, even just by walking into a room. But I am undecided about ghosts of people who have died. Starting around the age of 3 or 4, living in Blackfoot, Idaho, I constantly heard my name being whispered, every day, several times a day. Whether in the bathtub, a crowded room, an empty room, in bed at night, outside during the day, it didn't matter. I heard it loud and clear, constantly. I remember asking my older sister, who was 3 years older than me, if she ever heard it, and she replied that she always hears her name being whispered, and she thinks it's normal. She said that everyone probably hears their name being whispered, and it has to do with our eardrums or something. So being the young child I was, I believed her when she said it was normal and never thought twice about it. I continued to hear it throughout my entire childhood, and would dismiss it upon realizing that no one around me was actually calling out to me. Moving on to my teenage years, living on a small farm in Oklahoma, I still heard my name being whispered quite a bit, but not nearly as often. It dwindled from several times per day to perhaps a couple of times per week. I still never thought to question it, but it did begin to creep me out. Around this time is when I also began feeling presences about me. Sometimes they were good, sometimes they completely frightened me. I began to think I was crazy, but I learned to live with the feelings and tried to ignore them. When I stepped into my 20s, I moved to Texas. This is when all hell broke loose. In quick summary, I began seeing dark shadows, hearing children's laughter and crying, hearing footsteps when home alone, feeling something sit on the edge of my bed at night, feeling hands on me when I was completely alone, etc., etc., etc. There were even several instances when I would be driving my car, and something would jerk my steering wheel to one side and nearly cause me to crash. Then I obtained a roommate who claimed to see demons and angels. He claimed he saw 2 demons hanging around me, but that there were also 3 angels, so I needn't worry. I didn't believe him, but didn't tell him that for fear of offending him. Upon getting to know him better, I discovered that he had an extensive collection of books about demons. One particular book about how to summon a demon. Oddly, I found him in the bathtub one day, fully clothed with no water in the tub, sitting with the book and attempting to summon a demon. Naturally, I thought he was crazy and asked him to stop it, but he explained that the demon was already summoned and that he could control it since he was the one who summoned it. I told him to stop with his fantasies and to leave my home if he was going to act so absurdly. He then told me that he had asked the demon to show itself to me, but that it was not allowed to harm me or possess me. I didn't believe one bit of his ridiculous story and went about my business. That very week was when scary things began to happen to me when I was at home alone. The first was that a glass bottle lifted off of the kitchen counter and then dropped straight to the floor, shattering. Still being the skeptic I am, I searched for open windows, doors, ceiling fans, any sort of breeze, but nothing. I still have no explanation. Next, I was watching a movie one night. It had something to do with a demon, but I can't remember what movie it was. Right as the demon was coming into character in the movie, I laughed and said that's so stupid, when I felt a hand literally sweep my lower back from right to left, and every hair on my body stood on end. I jolted out of my chair and glanced the entire room to see what could have touched me, and nothing was there. I chalked it up to imagination. The next day I was getting ready for work and was in the bathroom applying makeup. As I was leaning into the mirror to apply my eyeliner, my eyes turned from dark brown to jet black, and suddenly I wasn't looking at myself, but rather something was staring back at me. I completely froze and nearly cried, and when I tried to look away, I couldn't. Something was holding my stare. I began to panic and wanted to cry, but for some reason I said aloud, "Let me see you." Instantly the stare was broken and my entire reflection in the mirror was clouded by a black shadow, concealing my face entirely. With instant regret, I began crying and shouted, "Leave." The entire incident lasted maybe a minute or 2. Within about 5 minutes of the incident, my demon summoning friend walked into the house and found me on the floor in the bathroom, shocked and shaking. Though I don't remember sitting down, he laughed and said, "Did he finally show himself?" I said some nasty words and told him to get the hell out of my house and take his crap with him. There was no blaming my imagination for the final incident. and there is no way someone could have staged that. The last thing I'd like to add is that I now have a 13-year-old son, and unfortunately, he is the biological child of that former roommate I kicked out. He knew I was pregnant with his child at the time, but upon kicking him out, he began to claim the baby wasn't his. I allowed him to make the claims because I knew I wanted no part in raising a baby with the likes of him. And quite frankly, I feared him. When my son was very young, he would talk to people who weren't there, stare at the ceiling or corner, and he often hears his name being spoken even when no one has said a word. He is also very sensitive to good and evil presences, as am I. My son is not evil or anything out of a scary movie. He's a good boy with a wonderful heart and soul. We are both Christian and have an abundance of faith. This story is about my mom's experience with the demon that plagued her life. I am skeptical about a lot of things. Even though I have opened up more as an adult, this is how I remember my mom describing him and the torture she endured. To begin, my mom was around 12 the first time she encountered him. She described him as tall, wearing a black coat with a black expressionless face. Well, if you could call it a face. This incident happened at my mom's aunt's home. My grandparents were at work and my great aunt would watch my mom. Their apartment was laid out as follows. You entered the front door into the living room. The stairs are directly to your left and there is a 250-pound handmade wooden framed couch along the same wall as the stairs. The living room led into the dining room, which led into the kitchen. My mom was coming from the kitchen, and as she stepped into the living room, she saw this figure wearing a dark cloak come through the front door past her 15-year-old cousin, who was sitting on the couch. It was obvious that her cousin could not see him. The tall hooded figure saw my mom immediately and put his finger to his lips as if saying, "Shh." He started up the stairs, and as he did, he waved his hand. With the wave of his hand, the huge couch flipped over on top of her cousin. He was trapped underneath with the couch on his back. As far as I know, he didn't break his back, but he had a fractured rib and a broken finger. Everyone in the family wondered how this could have happened. My grandma is a very religious woman, as are most of the older people on my grandma's side of the family. But when my mom tried to explain, no one believed her. That was her first experience with this demon. Fast forward many years later in 2009 and I'm 15. It was December, around Christmas, when I started to notice something wasn't quite right with my mom. She was vomiting up everything she ate. She was sleeping or lying in bed for hours and hours each day. At the time, she was working as a surgical technician for a heart surgeon. So when all of this started, she was going to work less and less. Eventually she quit, and that is when things really started. I'll share my first encounter with this demon, but this is first and foremost my mom's story. It was late one night, around 11 p.m., and my mom was really sick. She had been lying in bed all day just staring at the ceiling. My dad went in to take her some dinner, and all he said was she didn't look right, so he decided, after coaxing my mom into the car, that he was going to the ER to get her checked out. I was in my room in the basement, listening to music and finishing up my book I had gotten from the library that previous Friday. I thought I heard gravel crunching around my window directly above my bed where I was laying, so I stood up and moved my curtains out of the way. I saw a black face wearing a black hood. His face wasn't like a regular human. It was expressionless, almost like it was made out of clay. I screamed and fell backwards onto my bed. I rolled off, hiding next to it, only to realize my 13-year-old sister was upstairs alone. I peeked out of my door into the basement. To my left was the basement door leading outside, and to my right the laundry room and the stairs that lead to the first floor of the house. Once I realized it was clear, I crawled to the stairs and slowly started up them. The basement door was open, and since I didn't see or hear anyone upstairs, I went up into the kitchen. My sister was standing there with her hands on her hips and said, "Why were you screaming? I'm up here trying to watch a movie." Before I could respond, I heard gravel again. I ran to the kitchen window, which was directly above my bedroom window, and saw my parents pulling up the driveway. Once they were parked, I ran outside telling my dad about the strange man that was peeping in my window. He pulled out his pistol and started to do a check around the property, telling me to stay with my mom. When he came back, he told me he couldn't find anyone, that the car coming up the driveway must have spooked him and he ran off. I knew that it wasn't a man, it just had to be something else, but my dad brushed it off and just helped my mom into the house. Did he know who it was that had scared me so badly? Did he know about this demon before my sister and I did? We got my mom settled and into bed. It was super early in the morning, maybe around 3 a.m. when I sat down and started to fill my mom in on what I had seen. She just brushed it off and told me the same thing my dad had told me. Your dad and I must have scared him off. I didn't understand then why they weren't calling the police to report a crazy man staring into people's windows. But I eventually calmed down enough to sleep. Monday came without incident, and as I was going to my second to last class of the day, I was told my dad was here to pick me up. When we got home, my dad sat both me and my sister down and told us the news. My mom had gone to the doctor today and they had found stage 3 terminal cancer in her lymph nodes, both kidneys, and her lungs. They had given her just a few months to live, including going through chemotherapy and radiation treatments. My mom had been fine 4 months before. She was working out, doing everything a strong woman would be doing. She had gone to the doctor just 4 months ago and now she's lying in bed sick and dying. I went into my parents' room and just cried with my mom. After I had calmed down, she told me the story about when she first encountered the demon she called Seth, and that she believed it was him I had seen the other night, peeping in my window. Months went by. It was summer now and my mom was still with us, clinging on to life like she was stranded at sea with no water or food. She was more like a zombie, having random days where she was a normal person. We had our pastor come out and bless our house, along with one of his friends. Yet, as it usually goes, the disturbances got worse. I was seeing him now, out of the corner of my eye, watching me while I did my homework, read, or whatever I was doing. When I looked, he was gone, possibly off to terrorize my mom. My mom would say he would stand in the corner of her bedroom, telling her to murder her family, kill herself, and to stop fighting him. This was constantly going on. She was eating like she was a toddler, eating no more than a few bites of anything she had put into her mouth. I know this seems normal for individuals that have cancer, but it was different. As time went on, about 8 months after the cancer was found, she wasn't any better. But she wasn't any worse either. Eventually, our pastor told us he had found a friend who ran a Pentecostal church. Our pastor had simply told his friend that he was sending some people to him to meet and see if his church was a good fit for us. He didn't tell him our names or why we were going. That Sunday, we packed into the car and made the 2-hour drive to the church. I had only ever been to our small church before, and when I entered the doors, I was blown away by how many people were sitting in the pews. We quickly found seats just as the preacher was starting. He went on for a few minutes, welcoming everyone back, and started the service. To explain Pentecostalism, it is a Protestant Christian movement that emphasizes direct personal experience with God through baptism with the Holy Spirit. They also can speak in tongues, which was really odd to me at that time. Basically, if you've ever watched the show Supernatural, in season 1 a character gets electrocuted and they go to a church, and the preacher healed him. That is very similar to how things go in a Pentecostal church. Continuing into the regular service, he stopped and said, "There is a person here with cancer, severe cancer that has affected their lungs and kidneys." A man stood up in hopes to be healed, but then he said, "I'm sorry, sir, but this person also has cancer in their lymph nodes and has been deemed terminal." That is when I looked at my mom, who was just sitting there, staring up at the preacher. She stood up, followed my dad. The preacher had described her condition to a T. "Welcome, we've been waiting for you," he said. Our pastor hadn't told him anything. Our pastor is a very trustworthy man. He has never steered us wrong, and despite none of our family going to church anymore, we are all still very close. He officiated my sister's wedding and will do the same for my youngest sister and myself. So, we walked up to the front of this church, a couple hundred people staring at us, smiling at us. I had no idea why we were here, not until after all of this. I guess my parents didn't want to scare us. We arrived in front of the preacher. I don't remember much, but what I do remember has stuck with me and still makes me feel very uncomfortable. 2 women came to stand beside my sister and I. They wrapped their arms around our shoulders and just stood with us. My mom knelt before the preacher and he put his hands on her, with my dad and about 8 other people behind her. I asked the woman next to me what they were doing to her, and she asked me how old I was. I was almost 16 when this went on. I told her and she said that they were exorcising a demon from my mom, that everything will be fine and she'll live for a very long time. I started to hear this growling coming from the group across the altar, near my mom. I looked up, finding her, only to find something that wasn't my mom. Yes, that thing had her hair, body, and clothing, but it wasn't her face. Her face was distorted. My mom has blue eyes, but now they were replaced with these huge dark eyes and a malicious smile. I could only assume the thing that had made my mom this way was finally showing his true face as he fought the people praying against him. People had their hands in the air, speaking tongues, and people started to put their hands on my sister and me. As someone with severe social anxiety and claustrophobia, I was freaking out just from that. I heard screams, growling, and my mom's distorted voice pouting profanities at everyone. I don't know how long this lasted, but when the screams and growls stopped, there sat my mom, who was seemingly fine now. I ran to her, happy she was okay. We sat there for a few minutes and everyone started to clear out. The preacher, his wife, and family came to speak with us and invited us to talk more about what had happened over dinner. We agreed and followed them to our agreed-upon place of dining for the evening, a Pizza Hut. That dinner was the first real food my mom had ate in a year. She ate a large pizza to herself, along with salad, wings, and breadsticks. She says that it was the best meal of her life. This was a Sunday, and since we had quite a bit of a drive, we said our goodbyes and headed back home. The next day, my mom went to one of her doctor's appointments that week. On Mondays and Fridays, she would go in and get scans done to check progression. The previous week, she had appointments on both days. When they brought her scans back to show them to her, they showed no signs of cancer. There was not even a speck of cancer anywhere in her body.